Hello guys, welcome to OpenTecno. You always see me when I'm recording these videos. Usually at the bottom of the shot, I tend to have my iPad. An iPad, which I usually use mainly to watch videos, to prepare the scripts for some of the videos, to make mental outlines, in freeform or in some other application of these, for drawing, for taking notes. And previously I used this iPad a lot for university as a student. And that's why Baseus has gotten in touch with us and sent us one of their latest releases. A pencil that is going to replace the original one from Apple, which costs about 3 times more money. And yet, its functions are going to be the same, or even better, in some cases, because it will allow us some additional function. This is the Baseus Smooth Grating 3. It's already a 3rd generation of pencils that Baseus has launched. And what are you going to see during the video? That for much less money than the original Apple Pencil. We are going to achieve the same functionalities or even more because this one is going to have some shortcuts. So in this video I'm going to show it to you in depth and we're going to see how it's used, which I can already tell you is exactly the same as the original Apple Pencil. We're going to start with the unboxing, so we get on the table and I'll show you very quickly what comes inside the box. Come on, let's go for the unboxing of this Baseus Smooth Grating 3 sale. Pulling this flap from here and we have the first thing, a quick start guide, which tells us things like, for example, what do the charging LEDs mean? Or, well then, some basic little things about the pen and recommendations on how to connect it with the mobile. As you can see, then we have the pen here and we have a spare tip. A USB-A to USB-C cable to charge it and the pen itself that we would take out this way. As you can see, the pen has the charging port on this top part, which is where we could connect that USB-C to charge it in an hour. And then we would have a start button, 3 LEDs to indicate the battery. And then of course at the end, the tip with which we are going to write. Let me tell you that the price of this Baseus Smooth Writing 3 is going to be 22.79 euros, starting from the 19th of this same month. This Baseus Smooth Writing 3 is a pencil that looks very similar in aesthetics to the second version of Apple's pencils. A version that, compared to the first one which was completely cylindrical, now has a small notch on the entire side with magnets that allow us to place it on the top of the iPads, because the new ones, the iPad Pro, the iPad Air or I think the iPad, which is newer than mine, is version 9 also brings the possibility of magnetically placing it on the top. It's a pencil design that, unlike the original one I bought for my iPad, the one that connected via Lightning, I find it much more comfortable, I find it much more ergonomic. Having a notch, which, well, you'll be seeing in the plans I'm showing you, but it's a notch that allows me to firmly place my thumb there. The pencil doesn't move at all when I'm writing. For me, ergonomically, this pencil wins by a lot. It's a pencil that weighs approximately 0.547 ounces. It's a weight that is practically a little more than what a conventional paper pencil, a marker, could weigh. In short, it's not a heavy, bothersome weight at all, and it allows us to move it with a lot of lightness. In other words, if we don't see it, we would say that we have in our hand the typical Stadler with which we used to write on paper. Its tip is made of a material called POM, which, well, what it promises us is, after all, a lot of durability. It's a pencil made for writing, for drawing, and it allows us to make up to 30 kilometers of drawings with a single point. Then, however, when we use it, we're going to keep turning it and such. But if we were to draw a long line, we could make it 30 kilometers before this pencil's tip wore out. As seen in the unboxing, we get a replacement in case this one breaks, we drop it, or want to change it due to wear and tear. Inside it has a 140 mAh battery, which gives us 17 hours of continuous use. This means that we will be able to do about 3 days, for example, of university, if we were copying for 8 hours, which I think is unrealistic. It's normal to think that it won't last us less than a week. And well, hey, once a week we plug it in and you should know that it would take an hour to fully charge it. It charges through the USB-C port, which is hidden under a plastic cover. At the top, a little cover that is put on, mainly to prevent dust from getting in. Hey, if we store it in a case with more pencils, markers, then it prevents dust and things that could cause the USB-C port to not charge properly. We also have 3 small LED dots that show the battery level. We don't need to see it directly on the iPad, we can access it directly from here. And the connection is made via Bluetooth, so this pen is compatible with virtually all iPad models. As I've mentioned before, iPad Pro, iPad Air, or even my 9th generation iPad from about 3 to 4 years ago are all suitable options. You may have some doubts, for example, is it compatible with the functionality that the original pens have to be able to write with the whole hand resting on the screen? Yes, without any kind of problem. You will see next that we are going to do some demonstrations so you can see how it works, that it can be used while we put the palm on the screen, and in short, absolutely as if it were the original Apple Pencil. I just have to say one thing, this version that Baseus has sent us, so to speak, is like the most basic one. And it's a version that, although it attaches to our iPads with magnets, those that have that possibility, mine for example, doesn't have it. But just so you know, it's not going to charge wirelessly, but to charge it, we would need to connect it via USB-C. Yes, there are some higher versions, which I don't know if they are currently being sold in the Spanish market, but well, can you check it for your country? Yes, they include the magnetic charge. However, this is the cheapest version. The entry-level version and the charge would be done via USB-C, which I also don't think is super important. Having said that, let's go straight to the table with the iPad and see a bit how it works. I warn you that my handwriting is not the prettiest, I'm not the best at drawing, I simply use it, well, to jot down ideas and at university to take notes. And let's initially see how we connect our Baseus to the iPad. Simply, we hold the start button for a few seconds and you will see that the 3 LEDs light up. This already means that it is ready to connect with our iPad in the Bluetooth menu. As you can see, the Baseus PS052 is already connected. From this moment on, the pen works for everything we want within our iPad. This pen, if we now leave it here at rest for 3 minutes, would go back to standby mode, and when we picked it up, would it start working again? However, if we are going to stop using it, it is advisable that we hold the start button again for a few seconds to completely turn it off and so it doesn't consume any battery. Now let's look at some practical cases of how we can use it. Of course, the first use we can give it is simply to manage our iPad using this pencil. For many people, it might be easier than doing it with their finger, however, well, some might think that it only serves to write and nothing could be further from the truth. For example, we can use it to configure our new Mercedes-Benz in the configurator and, hey, do it in a much more comfortable way. As you can see, it has absolutely no lag and we move super fast through the entire iPad interface. Now, if you want to give it a more professional use for writing, drawing and so on, I recommend you first download the Baseus application in which you are going to be able to configure things. Like, for example, the sensitivity, which basically is how close the pencil has to be to start writing. The more sensitivity we give it, it starts to write, even almost before touching the screen. By default, it comes in -2 and we can put it up to -10 so that we have to be touching the screen all the time when we want to write. I would leave this by default, but well, for some drawing people it might be good for them. In any case, the most interesting thing for me comes in this part, which is where we can configure, after all, shortcuts for the button that the pencil has. Currently, I have it set up so that pressing it takes me to the home page. However, we can configure it, for example, to turn off the iPad, we can configure it to show us the latest open applications. We can do, for example, something that I find super useful, which is to take a screenshot. However, the screen recording that I had has now stopped for this very reason. But we can do other things, like for example, turn up the volume, play songs, play video. Undoing this can be very useful when we are, for example, painting, switch to the eraser or, remove the shortcut. For example, I'm going to leave it on undo. So if now, for example, we go to a blank page, for example, in GoodNotes. If, for example, we put hello, if we make a mistake and write something wrong, we can give it a touch to undo the last thing we wrote. This is super good and the original Apple Pencil doesn't have it. I'm going to get comfortable and I'm going to write hello. I'm writing from the Baseus. Oops, I made a mistake there. I give it a little tap. Smooth writing 3 and a substitute smiley face. In this way, we can take notes like these ones I have here, which I am studying for a certification. And we could even make some diagrams like, hey, here we have a server that would be a virtual machine, which is going to connect with another server in turn. This is the one that accesses a database that has a client's data. Anyway, here we could make a lot of diagrams. This depends on creativity of each one, and I'm not going to get into this. However, to tell you that the operation, as you are seeing, is practically identical to the original Apple Pencil, if I had to find a fault, what would it be? The part about this pencil? I think it detects it as if it were a keyboard. So that if, for example, we now have to write something in letter, as you will see, the keyboard to write on the iPad does not appear. However, if I now turn off the pencil and slide to write again, the writing keyboard would appear. I believe this is because this pencil, as I said, is detected as if it were one of the keyboards that can be connected to the iPad via Bluetooth. However, it is not. So we are left without the possibility of writing at that moment, and we would have to turn off the pencil to regain control of the keyboard. This one appears when we need to write in an application. And at the end of the video, all that's left for me to do is tell you about the price and why I would buy this Baseus Smooth Writing 3 before the original Apple Pencil. Well, look, I've brought you both pencils. I've brought you the original Apple one that works for my iPad and the Baseus one. As you're already seeing, the Baseus one is a little bit smaller, maybe about 1 centimeter or 1.5 centimeters, which makes it easier to carry in any case or any type of cover. In addition, the one from Apple is quite heavier and has more inertia, for example, when we want to write or when we handle it with our fingers. However, it lacks the first generation that works for my iPad. The side notch improves ergonomics. In short, for me, the Baseus pencil comes much more complete. Additionally, we have this little shortcut button in which we can configure the screenshots. Change the pencil we are writing with, play music, pause it. In summary, many things absent from the original. And now we get to the part about the price. The one from Apple is worth about 100 euros, while the Baseus can be found in the range of 30 to 35 euros, more or less. So, hey, if you don't need the original Apple Pencil for absolutely anything, this is a recommendation that you really should try, because you're going to save a lot of money and the functionality is going to be exactly the same. I've even told you before, with those shortcuts in the ergonomic part, which I think is super good. Now, I want to know your opinion. Leave a comment below if you think the product I've launched is good. Baseus the Smooth Grating 3 if you would buy it or if you missed something. Having said that, below in the description we will leave the cheapest purchase link we find, as well as some more information about this Baseus Smooth Grating 3. And with that said, I hope you liked the video. If so, leave a like and see you in the next one. Goodbye.